I desperately want to see.
They're not that interesting. They're not that interesting.
You already offered. Can't take it back now. Okay, this guy goes. Wait,
that's
what?
just network.
Yeah. What am I doing?
You want this one?
I want this one, and then I also want the audio.
And then audio is over here. You do the video. I'll do the audio. We're a team.
Why are computers so complicated?
We're a team.
Here we go.
And then your audio is this side, isn't it?
Huzzah! Awesome.
No, you don't.
I do not want to update Docker right
now. So while Evan's doing that, so Evan McGee, CTO of SignalWire.
That's right.
And a new enterprise called Everlit.
That's right.
One of the smartest people I know.
Oh. It's all an act.
I mean, getting back to what David was saying about Razvan.
Yeah. Razvan and I he also looks amazing. If you haven't seen Razvan in a bow tie, he also similarly can really pull it off. So I would advise going to many conferences in the future. Yeah, it looks amazing.
So we're now running late because of me, ironically. So
it's your show, man.
Off you go.
Well, I'm taking the full 20, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, thank you everybody for coming and for sticking around. It's an honor to be here again. I've been doing the CommCon since the very beginning, and Dan always puts together an amazing show and an amazing run of people and just the content. And if you ever don't catch it in the future, and sadly I can't go to the one in San Francisco. I don't know who here is going to San Fran. Anybody? Yeah. All right. Great. See, so Ed's like maybe. It's great if you can do both, if you can't watch it online, because I think you're going to get a very different array of content here than you will there. People are going to have very different, I believe, takes and sort of focuses on what's going on. And it would be interesting to hear everyone's opinion later on Discord or anyone else what you thought. But I'm here to talk a little bit about something a little bit more meta. It's not quite exactly like, there's technical stuff in this talk, but it's a lot more about the ideas behind how you can use AI these days to actually do sort of the art of storytelling and how that applies to both telecom and any sort of audio that you're generating. And what I wanted to say first is this is a story of sort of like why, what, and how. Why does taking care of the story of the audio matter? What can you do to have it? And then how do you manage to do it? And right now we really are living in a storyteller's dreamland, right? With all the new tooling come out, people who have had ideas for books in their heads. I have many ideas for books that I will never, my wife is a journalist, she's the writer. I just have ideas about writing things. And I suffer from a serious case of blank page syndrome for most things. I sit there staring at it and I can't get started. And I've learned to use these new AI tools to give me a little bit of a boost to be like, hey, don't worry about it, just get moving and start editing. And that applies to the AI things as well, right? Nowadays, you can actually use AI to take written content or any other content and transform it into a thing that you might not be an expert in, whether that's audio or video or anything. But before we get there on how we do that, let's start with the why and the who's doing it now. So let's start with some of the actual professionals in this, right? So who here knows who NPR is? It's an American thing, so so NPR is the National Public Radio in the US. It's kind of like our version of the BBC, but not at all. And they're just like, you turn on the radio, they have a very specific sound. When you hear NPR, it's like you turn it on and it's very paced and measured, and they make the same point 4 or 5 times. And they do that with very specific tools, right? They have standardized across their entire platform the way that they generate audio to get the NPR sound. They only use this mic. This is the only mic they use. They don't use any other one. They actually epoxy the buttons on it to be the exact format they need, because they'll occasionally hear people in the studio like click a button and they're like, don't touch that. And so they've actually epoxied all of them to exactly one specific type. It's an expensive mic, but it's a very good mic. They've also realized that almost all their listeners are going somewhere. They're in automobiles or they're moving around on the outside, and it's a very acoustically bright environment, a lot of background noise. And so they really needed to make sure that their voices, is the thingy over top of the thingy? Whatever. They need the voices to be able to be heard in those noisy environments, right? They need to be able to stand out in that sort of environment for very, very clear storytelling, because they're storytellers at heart. And so what they do is a couple things, right? They roll off all the bass below 250 hertz, because basically you can't hear it over the rumbling of car engines and noises and things, right? They go into the studio beforehand and they turn the mics all the way to 11, and then they listen if there's any like background noise. And if we're quiet for a second, You can hear shutters going off, you can hear the fans whirring. That gets picked up on mics, right? When you're generating AI audio, if you're recording it in a studio and you want to generate AI audio voice later, that stuff will appear in the final recordings where I'm bringing this up. They're very close mic'd, right? So I'm kind of far away right now. If I can kind of, I'm sorry, guys in the AV team, if I get real close mic'd here, right? It changes the sound dramatically. Hey, everybody, welcome to CommCon. So distance to mic matters a ton, right? And again, all of these factors contribute to their sound and are important when you're thinking about your own sound of what you want to do, because when you're cloning voices later and when you're generating audio, these things will come out in the final product, and they're actually very hard to tweak. You have to record it the way you want it. So here is, and they're distributed uncompressed because they're perfectionists, then the end stations compress it. But here's my favorite person. I can't see my, here, let's try this one.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg testifies before a Senate committee this afternoon, his first Capitol Hill appearance since Facebook users found out they could be among the tens of millions ensnared in a privacy breach.
I love Lakshmi Singh. She's my favorite. But she has a very crisp, clear-sounding voice, right? You can think about it if you're driving along, you hear that in your head, or you're walking your dog and it's loud, she would come through. Now, the next people I want to talk about is Disney. Right, so Walt Disney Imagineering. For those of you who are familiar with the Disney company, you might know who these people are. The Imagineers are the kind of people who sit in the background and do what we love to do, which is tinker and find out all the different ways to make magic happen in the parks, technically. In another lifetime, this would have been like a dream career. I had like books on it as a kid. Big fan of like how they actually take the world and make it into these sort of like very exciting attractions and theme parks. And one of the things that that company constantly talks about is that they're always talking about the idea that what they're doing is always telling stories, no matter where they are. You're telling a story as you're waiting in line for the ride. You're telling a story as you're walking through the park while you're buying popcorn. They really want to make sure that you're really immersed inside of the storytelling design. And audio is a huge part of how they do that, right? Disneyland has 15,000 speakers hidden all over the place. The arrows are pointing to two massive speakers hidden in the rooftops of those little pagodas where they do popcorn. Things you think have no purpose and have just like random little accoutrements are some of the speakers. They actually design their own algorithm based on the map of the parks that sonically blend everything together as you walk around. So if you're moving from Tomorrowland into the main hub, into Frontierland, for those of you who've been there, you wander around a lot, you're never going to encounter a sonically abusive environment. You're always going to transition cleanly from one thing to the next. It keeps people immersed, it keeps them entertained, it keeps them moving through the environment. They've designed it specifically to evoke emotions. When the things actually blend together, they actually stand there and they can measure it to make sure, like, when you're moving from the excitement of Tomorrowland into, like, Fantasyland, is your emotion changing? And they have park-wide made it so there's no more than a 3 decibel variation in any background noise at any given point. Pretty amazing, right? A lot of time and energy put into how to do this. They also... this is the Main Street from, like, a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, sorry. The audio's not leveled in this. You guys are going to put you guys to work. So this is the Main Street music. You're walking in, you're like, bop, 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 and you go into Tomorrowland. Okay. Now for the sound design on the rides, right? So the rides are very loud. There's roller coasters going. There's all kinds of stuff happening, very loud. They don't use 7.1. They use a 32.3.8 sound system in almost every ride. And 8 of those are haptic transducers. They used to like kick your seat and kick the floor or bounce things around at you a lot. They have multi-hour ambience loops, so when you walk into a ride or anywhere like that, you can stay on the ride for an hour, 2 hours. You will not hear the same thing twice. Again, they know their audience is waiting for a long period of time potentially, and they don't want them to hear things be repetitive because they know that will make them angry. They need to make them happy. They use some very cool examples of the Haas effect, and the Haas effect is effectively, the graphic here kind of shows you what it is that if you place 2 speakers, as long as you are within 10 or 20 milliseconds of the sound waves hitting you, your brain localizes the sound to the first sound wave, and the second one just reinforces it. So what you can do is have, let's say I have a screen in front of me. I'm on a ride for Star Wars or something, right? And it's like beep, boop, boop, bop, boop, boop, bop. But the sound is coming from the speaker here, a low volume one. They have then a bigger one set up here you can't see. That's doing the exact same sound effect pointed at you, but it's 10 milliseconds delayed. So what they can do is keep a small one here and keep that interface very tight and compact, but it sounds much louder because you're getting sound from a different direction. But the locality feels like it's in front of you, just the way the psychoacoustical effects combine. And they utilize that everywhere. And so it's a very cool thing. These guys are doing some pretty amazing work, and really, you know, it's for entertainment. But they know their audience is there to be entertained, right? And so that's kind of what the future is here now for our world, right? How can we use AI to do these sort of customized audio storytelling in the worlds that we live in and how we do it, both in telecom and elsewhere? These guys are professionals, they do all day long. How can we use the tooling nowadays to provide a similar kind of experience in the products and services that we give out, right? And what kind of stories do we tell? Well, the primary one really is IVR and contact centers, right? People mostly spend their time sitting there doing it. What are we constrained by? Well, generally G711. You know, we're all stuck. People are on the phone. They're really upset about it. So we're limited in frequency ranges and bandwidth. We're limited by the kind of experience that they want to get out of it, right? So if someone calls into a doctor's office, they're going to be probably pretty serious and just want to make a transaction happen. But if they're calling in to get information about like a magic show or a West End show, you know, Back to the Future, the musical, they might really want to be more entertained while they're on hold, like waiting for a ticket. Or let's say you're building a virtual queue system for online for something like a I don't know, trying to buy a music venue. Who was just the other day? Someone was trying to buy a ticket for something, and they had to wait like an hour and a half on a call. How would you design that, right? What's the story you're trying to tell those people? And you know, remember, we're living in the future here, so let's use some tools to do it. You know, all we can do, and all it takes is a little bit of AI, right? If you can clone a Dalek's voice, you can clone anything. The first thing to do is choose the right LLM. So those of you who are using a lot of AI right now, you know we probably might be using OpenAI, things like that. There's open source ones, closed source ones. The LLMs have different specialities and focus on different things. Whether you're parsing text for emotional response or sentiment analysis, where you're trying to get JSON out of it so you can parse it by a procedural system in the back end, or whether you just need it to operate very, very quickly and you're putting it on a process like Grok or somewhere like that that can really churn through these things fast because it's a real-time scenario. Choose the right one. They have lots of different variations. Doesn't really matter, but there's a lot. That world moves fast, so don't lock yourself into one. Choose the one that works the best for you. You can then move on to doing things like adding auto background music, right? Companies like Sonu. I don't know, who here has played with Suno at all? Suno. Anybody heard of it? Okay, a little bit. These guys are fairly new. They're doing music generation. You give them a prompt, and in this case, it could be a piece of a text. So I grabbed some text from my lovely and far more intelligent than I am wife's stories on ecology and biology, I think from Inside Science News Service, and just put this as the prompt. So here were the two sort of music it made from this prompt of I need background music for the following paragraph. 2 decades ago, biologists and natural historians around the world launched ambitious projects to create inventories of our planet's biodiversity. So here's the first music sample it gave. So you can imagine this sort of laid behind it, like it's setting the tone of the article, right? We're going to be delving into biodiversity. But is that really what we want? Is that the tone of the whole article, right? Maybe not. Maybe it's option number 2. Biodiversity. Yeah. 2 decades ago, biologists and natural historians around the world. Right? So the best part is these are 2 generations from the same prompts. It does then take the person who wants this to determine which kind of story they're looking to give. Is it more of a natural one? Is it more of an aggressive one? But the fun part is that that's an option for everybody. Okay, there we go. And then you can also do sound effects, right? This again, if you're telling a story, you want to put some sound effects in there. Maybe you have like an article online, who knows. 11 Labs now allows this as well. Here's another one about low-flying aircraft. You know, in the background, you do this. Sounds like a low-flying aircraft. Pause. Pause. Well, you heard the whole thing. Try this one. Sounds more like a train. So, you know, again, you get what you get these days, but it is getting better. This is a brand new thing they released. This stuff is transitioning and moving so quickly. But you can imagine, you pull out the text from the LLMs, you look at the actual content, you analyze it a bunch, you start inserting these in places and helping people generate better things, right? If you're on hold, maybe you have different kinds of music that are constrained. Maybe you need a different kind of ambience background hold music depending on the emotion of the person, right? Maybe if they're very agitated, you want really calm music. Maybe if they're not agitated enough, you really want to amp them up. Who knows? But you can really customize the experiences now for a lot of things. Okay, there we go. So I want to get back to the biggest thing, which is the voice cloning, right? So one of the biggest things here is the idea that these voices can be customized per company, per brand. And to Allison, if you're watching, you will always be the #1 voice. But in the future, brands and companies are going to want their own standardized voices. There might be an employee, it might be a purely synthetic voice, it might be someone they hired. But they also don't need to put that person in a booth every time they want to change 2 or 3 words. This is something Allison, if you know her, used to talk a lot about, which was having to go back into rooms and to give 8 to 20 different reads of different tones so they could mix and match them. And now they don't need to do that, right? It allows them and the client to experiment a lot more and give better client feedback to their own people by using these synthetic voices. Now compensation for the artists is another whole topic we can talk about, but this has changed so much. Here's an example of when I tried to do this back in 2018 in a talk that I gave, trying to clone, I forget what this is. This was actually, what's this one? Well, I gotta see what this one is. So this is like
人横过，然后能改，困于心，恒于虑而后作，征于色，发于声而后喻。
So this is 2018 tech, right? That's a native speaker speaking Mandarin.
A long time ago, the 2nd December, a cup of water.
So that was the same guy's voice dubbed into English and cloned in 2018. And you can hear it's kind of muddled. It sort of sounds, it could be kind of anybody. Here's the more recent version of it.
A long time ago, the 2nd of December, a cup of water.
And it gave him a British accent this time. Not entirely sure why. But it's come a long way in the fact that you can actually take different voices and clone them and dub them into different people. We've done a lot of this work now where if you took my voice and tried to have me do it in Japanese, and actually I'm going to break out of this for 1 sec and show you something. Do I have it still? I don't. I gave a talk on AI to my kids' class just recently. There's a bunch of 8 to 12-year-olds about what this stuff is like. And I cloned their teacher's voice. Her teacher is Spanish. I had her read English for 30 seconds. We cloned it, and then we had her read back in English. You now all have like a 3-hour recess. And the kids were blown away. And this poor teacher was like just stunned. It sounded so much like her. And her English is very heavily Spanish accented. And then we dubbed her into Japanese and had the same thing. And I recently gave a talk about this, and I have lots of time. I gave a talk at, I think it was JanusCon. I lost my wallet in Italy recently, and I actually found the person who had gotten it. They had gone and purchased a couple $1,000s worth of clothing at a store in the little town where I was living. And I went there, and they had the receipts from this person who had written their phone number on the back of the receipts. So I WhatsApped her and was like, hey, I would love my driver's license back and things. I understand the card's are already gone. And she responded in Italian in a voice memo, and I could not understand it. So I downloaded the audio, put it in one of the dubbing machines, and had her speak in English back to me. And it's her own voice in English talking to me. And the Italians I knew were like, how the hell did you do this? And it's very, very, very straightforward these days.
人横过，然后能改。
I don't know how to speak to that. All right, so how are you going to do this real quick? I know Dan took a bunch of my time, so I don't want to waste too much more. These are some of the big tools right now, right? 11 Labs, Play HT, Speechify. These guys all do great cloning. If you need them, they're good companies to use. All of them cost between, like on the high end, it's like you get like a bunch of audio for some subscription services, but then you're paying anywhere between 20 to 14 cents per 1,000 characters as you generate it. But you do get to keep the audio and you can cache it. So if it's not changing, you're only paying that as a one-time fee, right? If you're generating a lot of new content, it can get kind of expensive, but again, you can do it yourself. This is data pulled from Dave Horton, who I've now cited at a couple of different conferences. Dave is doing some great work actually measuring the latency and the timing of these services. He didn't do Speechify, I did that one, but 11 Labs and Play.ht, he measured those. One big difference is the Play.ht one actually buffers the audio a bunch, so there's actually some silence up front. So while it has 92 milliseconds as a return time, it's not actually 92, it's more like 300 or so because there's some actual silence there. But that time to first byte is high. Problem is there's also text preprocessors. If you throw words at it like 2.4 million pounds with a pound symbol, right? It might just read 2.4 million, or it might just read 2.4. So the way they interpret those wordings and actually then speak them out are important. 11 Labs does an excellent job with that. Play.ht does not do nearly as well. So you have to scrub it yourself beforehand, which you can do by tossing it through like an LLM, right? And doing your own audio scrubbing beforehand or other procedural systems. Not a big deal, but it does mean you have to add more into your pipeline, that then it's more stuff you have to take care of. So again, it might vary. Now open source, right? So we go back to open source for a minute. Kokwee was a big one there for a while. That process, they have unfortunately shut down. And I said this at a couple of places as well. It's really too bad. that project couldn't take off more, but it goes to show how competitive this game is right now, how hard it is to get a good quality voice model, and a good quality set of AI resources takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And that's why you're seeing a lot of this stuff come out of the bigger companies, right? It takes a lot of data and a lot of GPU time. I think something just came out. I was just thinking about another one that just came out a couple days ago, where, I mean, the minimum was 1,000 hours of training on a bunch of H100 GPUs, you know, for total costs of hundreds of thousands of dollars per run, just for a single language. So it can be very expensive. So trying to train our models can get prohibitively expensive, or you can do it over a long period of time. Again, the biggest thing right now is that a lot of these open source models that are coming out are trained on single languages, sometimes multi-language, but not always. So if you're doing it in English, you have a lot of options. If you're doing it in Spanish and German, you have some pretty good options. If you're doing it in Hindi or some other language, you're starting to get a lot less in terms of what you can actually get out of them. And that's one thing the big companies are doing. But if you want to jump into this and start playing with it, you can do some pretty great stuff. Tortoise is the one that kicked this all off about 1.5 years ago. It's by a guy named, I forget, what's his name? James, right? James Betker. He now works for OpenAI, so I'm sure he's part of all of the stuff they're doing. He was very responsive. He basically trained his first model on his home computer over the span of 3 or 4 months, had it go great. This was originally very, very slow. It was called Tortoise because the inference speed was, you know, a sentence every 2 or 3 minutes. And now some people have boosted it up. Now you can get to 20 or 30x real time. So this would be something you could try to consider incorporating into a real time context. Value is one put out by Microsoft. These guys were really going for cross-language things like the one I was talking about. Has a bunch of multilingual zero shot. You don't need that much training audio, only 3 to 15 seconds. So kind of a fun one to try out. Open voice is another big one right now. Open voice is a lot more about tone inflection. So let's say I have a bass speaker voice, like it's Dan saying something, but I then want to, and Dan said, you see this a lot actually in current music. So they're bringing back people who have lost their voice. There's a country singer who a bunch of years ago suffered from, I believe it was throat cancer, and they had to give him surgery, and he could never sing again. But he still has a lot of music in his head, and he really wanted to get it out. So what they did was hire a younger singer who could kind of copy him, and then overlaid the tone extraction from his old masters on top of this young kid. And he sat there in the booth with them twiddling it, and he put out his first single in 10 years just recently. And his family was there, and everyone was crying because they're like, this is you, but using these kinds of tools. So being able to overlay yourself on other people's audio is another example of where or why would you use this, but Open Voice is really trying to do that. They're doing some great work. I've given other versions of this talk where I get really deep into the math of what tokens are and how LLMs work and audio extraction and things like that. I didn't want to go too math heavy at this one, but here's a side of sort of how they do that, right? Bass speaker goes in, tone color extractor is applied to the top of the pipeline, and then it goes out. So good stuff. And the last one is probably the newest one here, VoiceCraft. This is probably the best one to play with today if you're not worried about speed. This gives you great quality. It's multi-language. It is a very, very effective voice cloning tool, but it does not operate in real time. It takes a couple seconds or 4 or 5 seconds to generate, even on a GPU. So really only available or only necessary if you are doing post content. And once again, always safety third, right? Make sure that if you're generating these kind of things, and if you're building a product that has any ability to generate or copy people's voice, as we've seen from the kerfuffle with Scarlett Johansson, right? It's not cool to go out and try to grab someone's voice. It also wasn't smart to tackle the one woman who was willing to sue Disney. If you don't think, if you're going to copy a celebrity's voice, don't choose the lady who successfully sued Disney. But you're going to put some audio watermarks in here. Audio WMark is kind of the current big boy, and they're the ones you can use. It is a very, very easy to use tool. It does a great job. It doesn't stand up to a lot of different kinds of compression or manipulations of the audio stream. So there are new ones coming out. This bottom one's a paper called WaveMark. WaveMark is another neural net system. And you can kind of see from that radar graph, the inner blue one is the audio WMark and like the kind of threat vectors they cover and how you could not attack it. This paper says that theirs works much better. So now we're just waiting for some sort of code implementation of it, which is coming. People are working on it. So again, audio watermarking, a big thing. But you know, I'm Evan McGee, and I wanted to say thank you all again for listening. Hopefully, just the idea of what I'm talking about comes across where next time you're working on somebody or working on a kind of text or IVR or something, you stop and think, you know, what's the story? What am I trying to get across? Who are the people who are going to be listening to this for hours on the phone? And not just think, why and how can it happen, but what it should be. Thank you so much.